I'm joined here today by Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General Ben Miser, who is the head of the Justice Department's Civil Division. I'm also joined by U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, Rob Capers, as well as the Acting Director of the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, John Smith, Chief Postal Inspector Guy Cottrell, and Lois Griezmann, Associate Director of the Division of Marketing Practices at the Federal Trade Commission. Now, we're here today to announce a series of major law enforcement actions against companies and individuals who were involved in mass mailing schemes that have defrauded literally millions of Americans. And the actions taken by the department and our agency partners include bringing criminal charges, filing civil injunction complaints, imposing economic sanctions, seizing criminal proceeds, and executing search warrants. These actions represent significant steps in the federal government's ongoing efforts to protect the American people, especially the most vulnerable among us, from fraud and exploitation. Now, every year, Americans receive tens of millions of fraudulent solicitation letters. And many of these letters, for example, falsely claim that the recipient has won cash or valuable prizes, and in order to collect these benefits, the letters say, the recipient need only send in a small amount of money for a processing fee or taxes. But the perpetrators of these mass mailing schemes are targeting elderly individuals and those in vulnerable financial situations, and their activities, the activities we're here to talk about today, have cheated Americans out of hundreds of millions of dollars. This fraud is massive in scale, it is global in scope, and it can be devastating on an individual level. The schemes involve a complicated web of actors located across the world. For example, the actions announced today include criminal charges in a civil injunction action against a Turkish resident whose direct mail schemes defrauded U.S. victims out of more than $29 million. They include a seizure warrant against the bank account of a Canadian payment processor that laundered money for more than 100 mass mailing fraud campaigns, and an order designating the payment processor as a significant transnational criminal organization. They also include a consent decree that would impose a permanent injunction against two so-called caging services in the Netherlands, which received and processed the victim payments, and also tracked victims' personal information. Now, the companies and the individuals named in these actions operated different parts of mass mailing fraud schemes in different parts of the world, but they all acted with the same malicious intent to take advantage of elderly individuals and other vulnerable citizens. Now, the actions announced today are the result of the tireless efforts from the men and women of the Civil Division's Consumer Protection Branch, also from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, the Treasury Department, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and the Federal Trade Commission. Together, we are deploying the full range of tools at our disposal, including administrative, civil, and criminal actions against those who commit fraud. And in the days ahead, we will continue working together to protect the American people from exploitation. But we cannot succeed alone. In this area, we need the public's help also. Indeed, the best defense against these types of scams is public awareness. And that is why the department is also collaborating with 7 federal agencies and numerous nonprofit groups on a public education campaign to combat this fraud and protect our nation's seniors from financial exploitation. Because our senior citizens should be enjoying their retirement, not financing some fraudster's lifestyles. Working alongside our partners, we've developed materials to educate consumers and caregivers about how to identify these mass mailing scams. We need your help in looking out for our friends, our neighbors, and our family members who might be at risk. If you do suspect a scam, we are counting on you to file a complaint with law enforcement. You can file this complaint literally online at ftccomplaintassistant.gov. That's ftccomplaintassistant.gov. Because together, we can stop mail fraud. And once again, let me thank and commend all of our partners in this effort. And I'm now going to turn the podium over to OFAC's Acting Director, Mr. John Smith. John?
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Attorney General and the Department of Justice for the opportunity to discuss in greater detail the U.S. Department of the Treasury's role in today's multi-agency action to combat attempts to victimize U.S. citizens through mail fraud schemes. Let me begin with some context for today's action. In 2011, the White House announced President Obama's strategy to combat transnational organized crime, which aims to protect Americans from transnational criminal organizations and activities, as well as to safeguard the U.S. financial system. As a result, the President signed Executive Order 13581, authorizing Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, to sanction significant transnational criminal organizations and those who support them. Today, we took action under this executive order to protect America's most vulnerable by designating the PACnet Group as a significant transnational criminal organization. With operations in Canada, Ireland, and the United Kingdom, and subsidiaries or affiliates in 15 other jurisdictions, PACnet is the third-party payment processor of choice for perpetrators of a wide range of mail fraud schemes. PACnet has a nearly 20-year history of knowingly processing payments related to these fraudulent solicitation schemes, which result in the loss of millions of dollars for U.S. consumers. Its international corporate and financial infrastructure allows it to launder and move money while obscuring the ownership of funds belonging to its clients. Despite many notifications it has received as part of the legal proceedings against fraudsters over the years, PACnet nonetheless has continued to knowingly process payments for numerous companies that are actively involved in widespread mail fraud campaigns. In order to hold key individuals and entities of PACnet's global network responsible, OFAC is also designating a global network today of 12 individuals and 24 entities across 18 countries. The 12 individuals designated by OFAC serve as executives or directors, often in several PACnet-linked companies simultaneously, and in some cases provide specific guidance as to how to hide illicit nature of PACnet's operations or deceive the financial institutions with which PACnet interacts. The 24 companies designated by OFAC today comprise a PACnet group or are entities owned or controlled by PACnet executives or other PACnet-linked companies. As a result of today's action, all property and interests in property subject to U.S. jurisdiction, such as bank accounts and financial transactions, of those designated individuals and entities, are blocked or frozen, meaning the title to the blocked property remains with the designated person, and authorization from OFAC is required to access or transact in that property. U.S. persons are also generally prohibited from engaging in any transactions with the individuals and entities designated today. As the Attorney General mentioned, OFAC carried out this designation in conjunction with U.S. and foreign partners. In particular, OFAC coordinated this action with the Consumer Protection Branch of the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. OFAC also received substantial assistance in this investigation from the United Kingdom's National Crime Agency. In order to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat the significant transnational criminal organizations that threaten the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States, Treasury will continue to collaborate with our domestic and international partners and to use its authorities to respond to the evolving nature of transnational organized crime. With that, I'll thank you and turn it over to Guy Cottrell from the U.S. Postal Service Inspection Service.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. Because it's not like a violent crime such as robbery or assault, fraud has often been looked at as a victimless crime. And as you just heard the Attorney General talk about the results of this investigation, that's not even close to the truth. Fraud not only victimizes people by robbing them of their money and shattering their sense of financial well-being, it steals their dignity and their image of self-worth. Postal inspectors receive complaints about these scams from victims, caregivers, and from diligent postal employees. We conduct investigations and use our administrative, civil, and criminal tools to try and stop these schemes. We also have a very active interdiction program to identify these mailings and stop them at our borders before they ever get into the United States mail. In this mass mailing fraud operation, we find 3 different yet simple scams: sweepstakes, lottery, and psychic. And here's how they work. Sweepstakes and foreign lottery scams are similar. Victims receive a solicitation in the mail claiming they've won a prize, such as a large sum of money, cash, luxury car, or they've won a lottery prize. Maybe not the top prize, but a hefty second-place prize. These winnings are actually depicted in large, bold type, or by a color picture of a luxury automobile. All the winner has to do to claim this prize is pay a nominal processing fee or a small amount for taxes. But they're not winners. The letters come in very attention-grabbing envelopes designed to lead you to believe that you actually have won something. However, no prize is ever delivered. No prize ever existed to begin with. The winning letter was just like millions of other letters that went out in solicitations and mass mailings to hundreds of thousands of victims around the world at the same time. For most individuals, once they've mailed in the small fee and received nothing in return, they soon realize they've been scammed. But some, especially vulnerable older Americans, keep believing they've won and they keep sending in more money. In some cases, the scammer then takes the relationship to the next level, increasing his or her grip on the victim while emotionally isolating them from friends and family. Often, victims are told not to share news about their winnings with their families, at least not until they receive their big check. Once the scammer starts, he doesn't stop. The scammer's demands are relentless. Victims get bombarded with more and more solicitations as their demographic information is rented or sold to even more scammers. The psychic scam gives a different twist. The scam starts when victims receive a highly personalized letter, purportedly from a psychic or a clairvoyant, who claims to have had a specific vision about that victim, and is either predicting impending good fortune or warning of imminent doom. The fortune teller claims to be able to ensure this good fortune will arrive or ward off the bad omens, but only if their instructions are carefully followed. These instructions typically include some ritualistic tasks, such as holding a specific piece of paper in their hands and then returning it to the psychic for a reading. Of course, the victim is also asked to pay some symbolic sum of money for the psychic to perform their work. But there was no specific or individual premonition about the subject. No matter how personalized, these solicitations are produced in bulk and mailed to hundreds of thousands of victims around the world at the same time. As the scam moves forward, victims typically pay an amount of money for a special good luck item, specifically tailored to bring them good fortune. When postal inspectors conducted a search in Connecticut, they found a warehouse full of these special good luck tokens, medals, and trinkets. And they were typically purchased for less than $1 from a company overseas and sold to victims for up to $45. Millions of victims around the world fall for these scams. In the U.S., we see hundreds of thousands of victims every month. What's more tragic is the same victims are lured into buying these schemes repeatedly, sometimes mailing payments on a daily basis. And the losses are staggering. In the U.S., these schemes result in the loss of more than $100 million per year. Globally, the loss is considerably more. Some victims have lost everything. Some have sent money to these schemers instead of paying their living expenses, such as rent, utilities, or even for medicine. Victims have become estranged from family members who have tried to intervene to stop the victims from continuing to send money. So what are we doing to stop this victimization? These civil enforcement actions are intended to stop the schemes of these operators and service providers. We will continue to investigate and pursue additional charges against these operators and service providers. Also, our efforts to stop mail from going to these foreign operators is having a dramatic impact, saving thousands of American citizens millions of dollars. The law enforcement and civil injunction efforts are just a part of our initiative. We believe that consumer education is the best defense against these scammers. We can't arrest all these con artists, so preventing the crime is critical to our mission. Our outreach includes media campaigns, television news segments through our Consumer Alert News Network, designed to make viewers aware of the various fraud scams that can victimize them. So how can people protect themselves from fraudulent solicitations in the mail? Don't send a payment. You never have to pay to enter a legitimate sweepstakes. Pay attention to your loved ones. Early detection is the key. Take note of the mail they receive. If you notice stacks of mail from psychics or solicitations for prizes, sweepstakes, or lotteries, that's a red flag. Take action. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our partners. Questions?
It seems clear from some of the events in Charlotte that a lot of residents there don't trust the local police account of what happened and what is happening. I wonder, what would it take for the Justice Department to take over that investigation, and does that sort of lack of trust about the local investigation play into that calculus?
Well, we're monitoring the situation now. It is still being investigated locally, but we are very aware of it. Every case is different, so I'm not going to be able to outline for you what would make us open a full investigation in Charlotte or when that might occur. But what I can say is that we are monitoring the situation and we're very aware of the issues, including the issue that you raised of trust between law enforcement and the Charlotte community as well.
Madam Attorney General, as the nation's top law enforcement official, a lot of people have been asking this question. Why is it that police in New Jersey were able to neutralize a terror suspect who was armed and shot a police officer in a way that kept him alive, preserved him for trial and for questioning? But just this week in Columbus, Charlotte, and Tulsa, black citizens were shot and killed during routine police interactions. Do you have any insight into the differences?
Well, look, I think that that's a question that I've certainly heard from citizens on the ground, from residents of those communities who've compared the situations. And I think that while we always say, of course, every case is different, when you are in that community where you feel that someone, a member of your community, was not given that same consideration, that's going to ring rather hollow. You know, that's not going to be a satisfactory answer. But we were not able to compare all of the different situations, line by line, action by action, item by item, except to say that this is a matter of great concern to the Department of Justice. Obviously, the terrorism investigation is proceeding apace as well, and that defendant's going to be brought to court, and hopefully we'll learn more about his motivations. With respect to the recent police shootings, we are looking very carefully at all of them. We're more involved in Tulsa, for example. We're still, like, as I said before, monitoring the situation in Charlotte and other jurisdictions across the country as well. When we talk about the issues of, at least when I have talked about the issues of law enforcement's relationship with the communities that we serve, one of the most important aspects of that relationship is, of course, trust. We see it frayed, we see it broken in many communities. And one of the ways that we've been trying to rebuild that trust is by trying to break down barriers or silos between law enforcement and the community and to get them to rebuild the relationship in areas that may not be connected to those shootings. For communities, for example, to be involved in police procedures, to be involved in police training. On my community policing tour, I've been highlighting jurisdictions that have been doing that. For example, actually Fayetteville, North Carolina, has a program where community residents as a group were actively involved in suggesting policies to the police department about body cameras. Other jurisdictions bring members of the community in and show them how they train law enforcement, both so that community members can learn how police officers are trained to act, but they can also offer their input and tell police officers how their perception of those actions, because we find the lack of understanding on both sides of that equation. So this area, obviously the specific cases, we have to deal with what happened with the loss of life with these individuals and determine how to best proceed and bring answers to those families. On the larger issue, one of the ways, as I said, is to get communities more involved in police activities, in police training. Also, in terms of opening up police departments to communities, we've seen successful situations where police departments will in fact open themselves up to the community. Come in and look at our officers. We're going to post online who everyone is, their demographics, so that you know us. We're urging that type of accountability and transparency as well. And finally, we're also supporting police departments as they themselves take action in these cases. So I think it's very, very important for people in the community to see law enforcement be accountable to the community.
Would you support force, just as a follow-up, with use of force policies being so different across the country, I named several different cities, it's sort of a patchwork. Is there any role for the Department of Justice to come in and try to make it more uniform?
Well, and again, I think that the role that we have been trying to play, and we have been playing in a number of ways, has been through, for example, through our Civil Rights Division, if we are working directly with the police department, either collaborative reform or an investigation, often we're focusing on use of force policies. We also, through our COPS office, have established a procedure where many law enforcement agencies come to the department and ask for assistance. They ask for a review of their procedures, often use of force, but sometimes others. And what we will try and do as well is to look at police departments of a certain size and demographic and match them with other police departments that have navigated those waters before, so they can have that peer relationship and mentoring relationship and see what has been found to be effective and accepted by both the police department and those community members. And so we've been working very, very hard on that, both providing that support where asked, when requested, and through our constitutional policing practice. Well, let me turn to Pierre, and then I'll come back, and then we'll come.
Madam Attorney General, having grown up in North Carolina, give us a sense of your personal reaction when you see some of those images unfolding from your home state. How do you feel?
Well, I can tell you, I did grow up in North Carolina, and I also know Charlotte rather well. So I had, like most people, I think, watching it, I was tremendously saddened at the loss of life. I'm awaiting information so that we can make a fuller evaluation of the specific incident. And when we see protest, when we see individuals coming out, I feel that in Charlotte, as in so many cities, in so many jurisdictions, people are protesting the specific situation, but they're also protesting the more general and often larger sense of a lack of connection to law enforcement or to the community overall. So it's with a great sense of sadness and pain that I watch that, but also with a great sense of hope that by expressing those views, particularly the peaceful protests that we saw before violence broke out over the last 2 nights, that their voices can be heard and that they in fact can have their views factored into local government, state government, the issues writ large. We're working with North Carolina on a number of issues, and so I think overall it's important that all the residents of that state feel that they have a way to express themselves and that they also have recourse when they have concerns.
It's clear there's a lack of trust there between some members of the community and the police department. Thus far, the police department is refusing to release body cam video. Should that video be released to at least calm the situation and let people know what exactly happened?
Well, I'm not going to give specific guidance to the police department right now since we're monitoring the situation. I think that what we have seen, however, is that in situations where information is released, even when that information is painful to watch or difficult to see, certainly from a personal perspective or for the family member of someone, that the act of providing greater transparency is more helpful than not. But I can't speak to the process that the Charlotte Police Department is undergoing. For example, I don't know if they've set up a procedure to in fact release the tape. I don't have that information right now. And so we again are monitoring that situation, and where we have seen more information being provided, that usually helps the situation. Again, it will, watching anyone lose their life is always going to be painful. And so they may have set up a protocol for that, they may have a procedure for that, and certainly that is something that we're willing to provide insight into. Right now we're monitoring the situation, but it is a local investigation.
In Charlotte 3 years ago, there was a police-involved shooting that was under sort of similar circumstances, and it attracted a degree of local attention, but we saw zero community unrest like what we're seeing right now. And I'm wondering, from your perspective as Attorney General, is it your sense that the anger is palpably rising in this nation, or is it more that there is a template that's now been developed within the last 2 years in which protests and occasional violence actually tends to follow these shootings in a way that, you know, when you were in Brooklyn, you might not have seen in years past?
Well, I will say people in Brooklyn do protest as well. They will definitely tell you what they think. You know, look, I think that the people who are raising their voices in Charlotte should speak for themselves, and they've been doing so, and we welcome what they have to say, because that's an important part of this national dialogue. So I won't try and speak for them and explain why they took an action this year as opposed to a few years ago. I do think that we have seen in the national debate over these issues attention not just to the specific shootings that have occurred, or the officer-involved shootings that have occurred, but a discussion within the community about the larger issues. More and more questions about the significance of a particular shooting, and what you heard people, at least through the media reports, people asking last night about what does this mean for how how our police view us. What does it mean for how people think about us? And those larger questions seem to be at the heart of the actions over the last two nights. But again, as I said, I think that the protest movement in this country, it's one of our most protected freedoms. It is in fact in our First Amendment, and it is one in which people express their views and they hold up a mirror to society, to those of us who are entrusted with ensuring that we're living up to the greatest ideals of society. And so the peaceful protest movement is an important one in this country, and it's an important one for bringing about change and raising issues. And I think you've also seen throughout the country, however, people expressing their views and concerns on similar issues, and it has in fact spurred a dialogue. It has helped this debate. This is a painful debate. These are painful times. These are difficult things to talk about, whether you are a community member or whether you are a community member who's also a member of law enforcement. But we are having those discussions across the country. I've been involved in them, literally sitting at the table with law enforcement and community members, watching how they have found ways to come together and hoping to share those ways with other communities so that they too can come together and work on these issues. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, people do realize that the support and health of a city depends on everyone, residents and law enforcement alike. And this is this gentleman.
Yes. Are you an advocate of proactive stop and frisk policies? Do you think they have a role in reducing gun violence? Are those the kinds of policies that have contributed to some of the community distrust that we're seeing expressed in recent weeks and months? And did you have any experience during your time in Brooklyn in how that issue was sorted out up there?
So, I'm not an advocate or not an advocate for a particular policy on that, particularly one that's now become part of the political debate and dialogue. And so I don't comment on things that have become part of that issue. What I can tell you is that in New York, I think people know the history with the review of stop and frisk policies and how that practice was implemented in a way that was not helpful to community trust and to, frankly, public safety and enhancing the relationship between law enforcement and community members. And so a number of modifications were made to the policy within New York. Obviously, police officers are able to stop individuals if they, in fact, have articulable, reasonable suspicion that they're involved in activity. That's an important part of police procedure, and it has not changed. The issue with stop and frisk in the New York area was the widespread, indiscriminate use of that practice, particularly when it was not generating success from a law enforcement perspective in either leads or tips or firearms, and the resulting lack of trust that it generated. As with every police procedure, we want to empower law enforcement to be responsive to community needs. We want to empower them to protect the community. And we want to give them the information and the training that they need in order to do it in a way that is constitutional, safe, and in fact promotes trust. So it's not really a yes or no answer. Sorry for that. So let me come to Devlin, and then I'll come back to you.
Thanks, Attorney General. In the New York bombing case, the suspect bought allegedly many of his parts for the bombs online through eBay. Is the government engaged in any sort of review of its tripwire programs to see if they need to alter or tighten anything as far as tripwires go for online purchases?
So with respect to the Rahimi case, because that individual has now been charged and will be presented in court soon, it's an active ongoing investigation. I'm not able to give you a response on the specifics of that, except to say that, of course, as with any case where we are looking at methods and means of obtaining either explosives, firearms, whatever was used in something, we'll be reviewing the ways in which suspects gained access to that.
For the last question. Actually, I promised him as well.
So Dell and then in the front.
We're 7 weeks away from an election, and there's been a lot of stuff in the news about Russian hackers, other hackers trying to influence the election. I'm wondering what the Justice Department is doing to prevent fraud, prevent hacking of the election system. Are we doing things differently this year than maybe they didn't do 4 years ago or 8 years before that?
Well, obviously, with respect to cybercrime in general, it's a priority of mine and something that we're always focused on. And with the hacks that were recently disclosed this past summer, obviously those investigations are ongoing as well. We take it very seriously. We're always working with individuals who find themselves involved in this to both gain information about any kind of disruption, give them the tools they need to stop a disruption or stop information from being taken. And we also look at all types of infrastructure. Most recently, as has been reported, the Department of Homeland Security has reached out to all the 50 states and offered assistance in reviewing their electoral systems to determine if there are vulnerabilities, to offer assistance, essentially because, of course, that's a very important part of our process. We have confidence in the electoral system in the states. I know that the FBI director has noted it's because it's primarily a very old and outdated system. Sometimes planned obsolescence can work for one. But in this regard, it's something that we're taking very seriously, and we're pursuing all avenues there as well. I think the difference in recent years is that the hacks that we are seeing now are coming close to an election. They are targeting political entities or people, again, and so that's something that at least we're not seeing or was not publicized in recent years, but it's something that we take very, very seriously.
Sticking with the cybercrime theme, it was reported today that emails belonging to a White House hacker were reportedly leaked on the internet, and that was to include apparent copies of Mrs. Obama's passport and other internal White House documents. Is that an issue that the Justice Department is currently looking into, and has DOJ been able to authenticate any of the information that was leaked in this act?
So we're aware of those media reports, and it is something that we're looking into, but I don't have any specific information for you at this time. But we are aware of those media reports. And there was one in the back who didn't get to ask something. Yes, ma'am.
Rahimi's family came to the United States back in 1990.
Yes, ma'am. I couldn't hear the beginning
Oh,
of
I
the
said
question.
Rahimi's family came to the United States back in 1995 as asylum seekers. Should there be, should something blink in the system when somebody who has sought asylum in a country returns to that country or visits that country as going back to Afghanistan? And that didn't seem to happen in this case.
Well, again, the asylum process runs through a series of vetting and a series of review, and ultimately someone comes in. Foreign travel is recorded. When people are aware, we are able to go back and look at travel records for people as part of the normal course of travel records. It would depend upon, again, how close it was, if someone was, for example, still in the middle of seeking asylum. So it's very hard to say with regard to this specific case what difference that would have made. What I will say with regard to the defendant Rahimi is that we're still engaged in actively reviewing everything that we can find out about this individual, his connections here, his connections overseas. That would include travel. That would include any contacts he may have made during travel, to see how they would also factor into the events that he stands charged with. Thank you all.